Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. Please, let's just give an extra 2 minutes so that more participants trickle in. And thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on gender-based violence today. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important conversation as part of the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. My name is Halima Sabwa, and I'm a communication specialist at Amref Health Africa in Kenya. I'll be co-moderating today's discussion, and it's an honor to be moderating alongside Gloria Chola, Executive Director of the Tunaweza Empowerment Organization. And we are here to tackle not just the statistics and facts, but also real stories behind gender-based violence in Kenya and beyond. So through today's dialogue, we hope to shed light on key issues, challenges, and pathways to creating safer communities for all. So Gloria, if you could also introduce yourself as a moderator.
Thank you so much, Halima. I'm grateful. I hope I'm audible enough. Everyone else can hear me, right? Thank you so much. My name is Gloria Ochola. I work with Tunaweza Empowerment Organization, a community-based organization working in Migori to realize the rights of the most vulnerable population in the community. And I'm happy to join in this conversation, especially now that we are marking the 60 days of activism against gender-based violence. Hoping for a fruitful deliberation and a lot of learning and way forwards when as we gear towards ending GBV in Kenya. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And as we begin, just a couple of things that we'd just like to share. The session is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. And we would also encourage interactive discussions. So please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. Each panelist will have some time to speak, followed by an open Q&A session with all of you. And as we are discussing the panelists, we are fortunate to have distinguished and a distinguished group of panelists who bring rich insights and experiences. Wendy Akoth, who is a program officer at the Survivors of Sexual Violence in Kenya Network, Wangu Kanja Foundation. Davis Okeyo, Senior Program Officer at the National Gender and Equity Commission. Barbara Ndolo, Program Officer with the Make Way Program, and Collins Kodek, Activist and Conveyor of Social Justice Center for the Western Chapel. And panelists, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves briefly. If you could just take a minute to tell us your name, the organization you represent, and its focus in the context of gender-based violence. So Wendy, let's start with you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Halima. My name is Wendy Akoth. I work at Wangu Kanja Foundation. I serve as the program officer of the program, the Survivors of Sexual Violence in Kenya Network, which is a program under Wangu Kanja Foundation. Wangu Kanja Foundation is an experience-informed and survivor-led feminist organization that was founded in 2005. And it was founded after the survivor, who's the founder, went through an ordeal, and the challenges that she experienced were instrumental in the formation of the organization. So the organization primarily supports survivors of sexual violence in regards to access to comprehensive care and support, but we also address sexual violence in regards to prevention and protection as well. So the Survivors of Sexual Violence in Kenya Network, which is the program that I support in coordination, is a national movement that brings together a unified front. It has membership in the 47 counties, and these are survivors of sexual violence, both male and female, who've gone through these experiences, but they're also hand-holding other survivors along the referral pathway. I'm glad to be here today. Wangu Kanja Foundation also convenes the Coalition Against Sexual Violence that brings together 15 women's rights organizations that are working to address sexual violence in Kenya. Hoping to share more as we proceed. Thank you, Halima.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That's fantastic. And Davis Okeyo, can you also share your name, organization that you represent, and its focus on GBV?
Thank you so much, Halima and the team. Greetings once more. My name is Davis Okeyo, a Senior Program Officer at National Gender and Equality Commission. National Gender and Equality Commission and other constitutional commissions and independent officers, our role is to protect the sovereignty of the people, which you are seeing GBV supporting that commitment. So today I'm pleased to join this important discussion on ending gender-based violence. Because as a commission, we played key roles right from the passage, the task force on sexual offences, violences, which came up with metrics for tracking for the country, and also just reassuring the country our commitment as a country to bring all other actors from the police, from the health, from the judiciary, from the prosecution, and also the role of civil society and the citizens themselves, so that we can end gender-based violence. But again, also in that commitment was recognition that as a country, there's still gaps. And those are the gaps we want to learn about. But how do you respond when we fail the Kenyan, when we fail the youth, the issue of gender violence? Thank you. Again, just quickly to wrap it up, I think the commission, we stand this great time of 16 days of gender activism. Halima, are you trying to talk?
No. I'm fine. Thank you so much for that. I think there was an issue with network for a second, but thank you so much for that introduction. It was great. And so our next panelist is Barbara Ndolo. So please tell us your name, the organization you represent, and its focus in the context of GBV. Hello, Barbara Ndolo.
Yes, thank you so much, Halima. Hi. And thanks everyone for joining. Just as you said, I'm Barbara Ndolo. Barbara Ndolo work with Cheshire Disability Services Kenya. Cheshire Disability Services Kenya is a disability-focused organization that work to attain the highest achievable quality of life for persons with disability, especially children and young persons with disabilities. So at Cheshire Disability Services Kenya, I serve as a program officer for the Make Way program. And the program is a consortium of 6 organizations across the global north and south, with direct or active implementation in 5 countries across East and Southern Africa. So the program, our main core or goal is to ensure sexual reproductive health and rights for all, especially young persons with compounded vulnerabilities. And with this, we are using an intersectional lens to achieve our goal. One thing that I would like to also mention is that in our work around SRHR lobby and advocacy, we are using an intersectional lens to ensure that all survivors within or in all their identities are able to be taken care of as far as program and policies are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was fantastic. And our last but not least panelist is Collins Kodek. Please introduce yourself, the organization you represent, and its focus on GBV. Hi, you're speaking on mute.
Thank you very much, team. My name is Collins Kodek. I am convener of the Social Justice Centers Working Group in Western Kenya. The Social Justice Centers Working Group is a collective of grassroots activists. It is currently the fastest growing and the largest grassroots activist movement in the country, Kenya. Our focus is on entrenching people's sovereignty. And in the context of GBV, we live to cherish the principles of social justice, in particularly gender justice. To that particular extent, we do a lot of interventions around gender-based violence as one of the limitations or barriers to achieve gender justice. So our interventions are on varied aspects of gender justice, or in the way GBV manifests itself, and the intersectionalities around it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Collins. And those are our panelists for today. But before we begin, we should remember that gender-based violence is an issue that is deeply rooted in societal norms, systemic gaps, and cultural beliefs that perpetuate cycles of violence. And so as we begin our session today, we'll explore the current context and prevalence of GBV in Kenya, the impact of societal norms and systematic issues, international commitments and legal frameworks in place to address GBV, and how we can better support survivors in seeking help and justice. So as a team, thank you so much for the people that joined us today. Let us make this dialogue a step forward in the fight against gender-based violence. And Gloria, over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and welcome you back once again, participants from wherever you are. Feel most welcome and eager to hear, to learn, and also to share our experiences, even as we talk about ending gender-based violence. Most of the times, we have had quite a number of intervention towards gender-based violence. And perhaps sometimes somebody would wonder, when we talk about gender-based violence, what do we really talk about? So for instance, gender-based violence basically is an umbrella term that is used to refer to harmful acts or abuses that are perpetrated against a person's will. These are acts of violation that somebody experiences against their will, and as a result of that, it causes a number of disadvantages, a number of effects, a number of unwanted outcomes in an individual, both psychosocial and emotional well-being. Gender-based violence also, in another perspective, is a form of harm that is directed against an individual or perhaps a group of individuals based on their gender. It could be because they're boys or they're men. It could be because they're women. It could be because of the fact that they do not conform to any dominant gender roles that are available within a community setup. Then again, gender-based violence sometimes entails harm or threat that are inflicted on a person because by the virtue that they are male or they are female, or due to power imbalances that are also entrenched in our society. So gender-based violence presents itself in various ways that we might see. Some of them are seen, some of them are internal, but the most interesting part is that they affect us and not us as the recipients, but they also affect the general population and the people that depend on us. So then how do we look into gender-based violence, and not just as a gender affair, but also how does it look at the general population when one suffers from gender-based violence, when there are no laws that govern how gender-based violence can be prevented, can be protected, and the rule of law is not adhered to. What are some of the effects that as a nation or as a community or as people who are working towards ending gender-based violence, what are some of the ways we can ensure that the policies that are set aside, the interventions that are in place are actually adhered to and they bring out the outcome that are intended without doing more harm to the survivors? And without also putting blame to the survivors, without also giving more power to perpetrators. We have a panel of very educated or experts in this area of ending gender-based violence. And I would want to give them, with that background that I have given as far as gender-based violence is concerned, I would wish to give them an opportunity to take us through some of these areas gender-based violence that we need to discuss. For instance, when we talk about forms of gender-based violence, what are some of the forms that are experienced in Kenya context? What are some of the experiences that women have had as far as gender-based violence is concerned? I would want to welcome on board Barbara and Dolo to share with us some of the forms that are experienced by women in Kenya as far as gender-based violence is concerned. Feel welcome, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for welcoming me to come and speak again, especially on this very important issue. Allow me to begin by emphasizing that we all know that gender-based violence is often perpetrated or perpetuated by men on women and girls. However, it's also important to note while we have this conversation that GBV can also be perpetrated by women against men respectively. But why we put emphasis actually on girls and women, and of course gender diverse persons, is because of the disproportionate nature of this violence against them. And for the question, it would be good to note that violence against women and girls may take a number of forms that include emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and economical abuse. And just in case you're wondering or you're new to the sector, or probably you're joining such a webinar for the first time, we're going to delve briefly into the definitions, or just trying to understand what do we mean by all these, the four forms that I've mentioned. But also, it would also be good to say that these are four major forms, but we also have other forms of violence against girls and women that also include harmful traditional practices. The list is not exhaustive, but for today's conversation, we will focus on the four that I have mentioned. So onto physical violence. This is intentional use of force causing injury on another person. I'll try to be as simple as possible. And of course, by way of bodily contact, and this could be by slapping, beating, boxing, kicking, etc. It may also, take the form of minor assault or even manslaughter, And we also have, of course, economical violence that could be an act or behavior which cause economic harm to an individual, and of course denying them access to money, economic activity, or other basic needs by either stopping their finances or blocking them from achieving their financial independence. This form of violence, of course, can take all these forms that I've mentioned. And we also have examples like, property damage. Somebody could damage your property to ruin your financial independence, restrict your access to financial resources, financial education, or even the labor market. And in cases of, for instance, divorce, not complying with such issues as, alimony. We also have sexual violence, and the most discussed and spoken of. And this is a sexual act performed on an individual without their consent. And sexual violence can take the form of rape or sexual assault. We need to also note that importantly. It also involves forcing or intimidating or, tricking someone into engaging in sexual act against their will. It could also be any sexual act with someone who is unable to understand what they are doing, someone who isn't able to consent because of either age or illness or probably disability, or this person could be under, influence of other drugs. It could also be the form of forcing a lover to engage in sexual acts, or the form of sexual violence that we refer to as marital rape or intimate partner violence. And I know that in the next couple of minutes or seconds, we're going to discuss what IPV or intimate partner violence is. And earlier on, I mentioned about sexual harassment. That can also be a form of sexual violence that can either be verbal or physical. And it's important to note that it may occur in private or public spaces, e.g. in public transport, in schools, workplaces, or even in the streets. So one thing of the ones that are mentioned, or the forms that are mentioned, I would like to also emphasize that the forms of violence may lead to physical or emotional trauma, and that brings us to emotional violence. Which is which abuse, and when you when you take control of a person, what someone can do or what they cannot do. Actually, it includes taking away their independence because of the power, the kind of power, type of power that you hold. And we won't go without mentioning that, of course, we have the harmful traditional practices that reinforces violence against girls and women. These include, forced or early or child marriage, and of course, female genital mutilation. And just as I also mentioned, there's also sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, trafficking as a form of violence against women, and also domestic violence, or if you like, sometimes intimate partner violence. And also femicide, and we're going to also discuss what we mean by femicide in the next couple of minutes. Now, onto what partner violence, intimate partner violence means. This is any behavior by, or it could be a current or a former partner or spouse, and it could cause physical, sexual, or even psychological harm. And it is actually one of the most common forms of violence experienced by women, either in Kenya or across the globe. And then we also talk about femicide, which is actually the most extreme and brutal manifestation of violence against girls and women. And I must say that this is deeply rooted in and manifest in power imbalances in our society, and of course not to forget how patriarchy reinforces femicide in our society, and also in Kenya particularly. And femicide has equally promotes an equal status of men and women. It's important to know that, especially if you're getting into GBV prevention and response. In context, basically, some people refer to it as intentional killing with a gender-related motive, and it's a bit different because people quite confuse femicide and homicide, and I would like to distinguish the two, because the motivation of homicide may not actually be, gender related. So as I finish on this question, I would like to also tell us or note that, whether at home or in the streets or during wars, violence against women and girls is a human right violation of a pandemic proportion, and it takes place, just like I mentioned, in public or private places. Thank you, Gloria, back to you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was very insightful and very rich in content. One of the key things that I've come out with from representation is that gender-based violence can happen to anyone. It does not discriminate, and an extension of this is that it disproportionately affects women and girls in as much as it can happen to anyone. And when we talk about also intimate partner violence, it has come to be one of a common form of violence, where its significant effect has been the femicide that we have experienced in this country in the past months, and even we are continuing to experience that because we still receive reports from our communities. That those reports, those that are reported, there are those that are not reported. So we realize that the extent of IPV or intimate partner violence results into the number of femicides that we are seeing or we are experiencing currently. I want to give it over to Wendy just to also share something briefly on the femicide that we have in the country and the continuity of the same, and why do we have such incidences? Why are we silent about them? Or is there anything that we are doing as far as ending femicide or speaking about femicide is concerned? Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Barbara, for highlighting those forms of sexual and gender-based violence. But to respond to Gloria's question on femicide, when she was speaking, I was just thinking about how physical violence is the most difficult form of SGBV to deal with because, of course, of the dynamics of domestic violence and then also sexual violence. So the reason I'm highlighting those two forms of sexual and gender-based violence is because of the interconnection or how it comes out in cases of femicide, because there's a component of physical violence in femicide cases. There's also a component of sexual violence in femicide cases. And we know that in Kenya, we've had femicide, it's been happening, yes, but then we've had a rise in the cases since last year in January, and the prevalence rate has just been rising each and every time. So you've asked why it's been on the rise. I think it's just because as a society, we've normalized perpetrating sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls. And the question on whether it's being addressed, I'd say not fully, because one of the gaps or challenges in regards to addressing femicide, we can allude it to, say, service providers along the criminal justice system, especially security. That's now the police officers who are supposed to, of course, support survivors in documenting cases. I'd say, I don't want to say lack of knowledge, but then I'm looking for a better one for that, but it could be because most police officers do not know exactly how to document cases of femicide. Because how then do they document these cases? Do they say it's a homicide case? Do they say it's just a normal or a common murder case? Because how it is documented will set the pace for how this case is going to be addressed. Because if cases of femicide keep being documented as murder cases, that means we do not have data to show that these are the number of women who've been killed for the past year or for a certain period of time. And then also the tools for investigating such cases. Do we have existing guidelines for service providers along the criminal justice system to say they are following up on these cases? And then we can also talk about with femicide, because for femicide, we do not have a survivor in this case. We have a victim because now they've been killed. So following up on these cases and the fact that maybe the individuals or institutions mandated to support to ensure that there is access to justice, it becomes very difficult because even the families that are left behind, the friends, they are not able to get the proper support within that system to follow up on these cases, because mostly they'd go back and say, you do not have evidence for this case, so there's no justification for you to say this is a femicide case. How do you know that this girl, and then the victim blaming aspect of it. Because when incidents happen, you get to hear people say, because especially for the Airbnb thing that people keep talking about, that she went to the Airbnb, she made that decision to go to the Airbnb. But people forget that a big number of the femicide cases also happen in households. Intimate partner violence does happen. And that's the reason I was talking about physical violence being one of the most difficult forms of SGBV to deal with, because it's difficult for survivors to walk out of such situations because of course, they've been socialized to stay and be patient. The perpetrator will change at some point if it's a man, if it's a woman, but then of course for femicide, you know, it's a man who's perpetrating that. And then to add on to the bit about emerging forms of sexual and gender-based violence that is also directly related to femicide is technologically facilitated gender-based violence, because looking at the incidence of femicide that has been perpetrated by probably an individual who hasn't known the survivor or victim in this case for a very long time, most of them would meet online and then they'll have conversations, meaning such conversations would start in online platforms and then lead to femicide. But then back to now TFGBV as one of the emerging forms of SGBV that is perpetrated against women. That is also another bit that we do not have proper reporting structures. Today, if I was to be violated, say if the violation at first would be technologically facilitated, then I'd report the case to, say, DCI in this case, and then they'd ask me to probably leave my phone there till they're done with the investigations, no matter how long it takes. If it takes a week, if it takes 2 days, the phone has to be there because they're saying they have to get evidence. So I feel like there's that gap in terms of how service providers are investigating these cases, and also the know-how of if this happens to me in an online platform, if somebody threatens me and they ask for us to probably engage in this way, then I need to take a step back. But then it's not justifying any SGBV case that happens, because individuals who perpetuate either femicide, TFGBV, economic violence, physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence, or even the social cultural violence, the harmful practices, they do that because they want to do that, because we are in a society where gender inequality is rooted, we are in a society where there is abuse of power, we are in a society where people decide to disregard human rights in general. So that's my input. I'm happy to share more. Back to you, Gloria.
Thank you, Wendy, for putting that perspective and also understanding how IPV or intimate partner violence relates to the cases of femicide or relates to the femicide incidences that we're experiencing currently nationwide. With that said, we have had a number of gender-based violence, both reported and unreported. And it is true that gender-based happens on a day-to-day basis. And it is also reported that research-wise, that in every 3 women, 1 of them has suffered gender-based violence. And this gender-based violence has been perpetrated by persons who are closer to them. So I want us to take a deep dive into data as far as GBV in Kenya is concerned, and maybe welcome Davis to share with us the current data or current indicators of gender-based violence prevalence in Kenya. Davis, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. If you listen to Wendy rightly, what Barbara also said, and you, Gloria, is that all forms of gender-based violence must be condemned and addressed. Haijalishi, okay? So we at National Gender and Equality Commission, we join the participants in this dialogue forum in condemning the alarming rise in gender-based violence and femicide in the country. Again, as a commission, we echo the recent call by His Excellency, the President, to end this scourge. In fact, the President fell short of calling it a disaster. And you know, when national disasters happen, we need to stop everything and all system goes to it. But we are happy seeing actions towards ending this scourge. Again, it's deeply troubling how Gloria you put it, that women and girls and now increasingly boys are continue to be targeted and harmed solely because of their gender. Allow me to dive into the data on GBV and also pick a few on technology facilitated gender-based violence. Recently, our security agencies reported that 97 women and girls were killed in the past 3 months. I think that was between September, going back October, July. That translates to around every month, more than 30 women daily. We are seeing women being killed, as Gloria put it. Again, as a commission, we are aware that there could be many more cases of femicide that are concealed as normal death and therefore hardly reported. And my fellow panelists really has just alluded to that. Again, we also know there are still many incidences of GBV that go unreported or undetected. Again, I want to pick on the 3 forms of violence. I'll just share the data we have. I'll start with physical violence and also just share some data on who are the perpetrators of physical violence in the country. The Kenya Demographic Health Survey 2022 indicated that 34% of women in Kenya have experienced physical violence since the age of 15. When we quote the authority of Kenya Demographic Health Survey, the question is, does that nullify the rich data the many organizations, shelters, or safe spaces have in terms of many violences they're receiving in the institution? I'll not pronounce myself on that, but I just want to challenge us that even at the grassroots level, let's ensure the integrity of the data we are collecting, their validity, and also the ability to be verified, so that we can compare with what the official the Kenya Demographic Health Survey position is. Slightly lower proportion of men experience, and we also like to just reiterate that gender-based violence is a sector of any gender, as Barbara had put it. Again, experience of violence among women, according to KDHS 2022, is that experience of violence among women increases with age. In fact, it was documented that 20% of women aged between 15 and 19 have experienced physical violence since the age of 15, as compared to 42% of women between age of 45 and 49. So that was just how do we program as we reach out to the adolescents? How do we ensure that we don't leave out to older women also into our programming? Again, marital status was highlighted in the report as links to experiences of violence among women. And Barbara has just alluded to intimate partner violence. Again, it was documented that women who have ever been married are more likely to have experienced violence since the age of 15 than those who have never been married. The data was at 41% versus 20. And the percentage of women who have experienced violence differed from county to county. We had counties reporting the lowest, and some countries are extremely high. I'll just pick the top 10 countries where violence, and then Bungoma County. Actually, at the moment, I'm in Bungoma County, and that's what we are engaging the survivors and other referral players around it. Recorded 62%, as compared to Bandera, which had the lowest at 9%. So other top counties include Narok, Kajiado, Kericho, Bomet, Kakamega, Vihiga, Bungoma, Busia, Siaya, Kisumu, Homa Bay, and Migori County, where this program is hosted. Who are the perpetrators of physical violence? And women who have ever been married or ever had an intimate partner as their current husband or intimate partner were highest at 54%, followed by a former partner or a former husband at 34%. So the most common perpetrators of violence among men who have ever been married or ever had intimate partner were teachers, 28%, followed by the current wives or intimate partners at 20%, and also former wives or intimate partners. Again, it's also the report teased out and emphasize why we really need to engage with the teachers and also schoolmates, who are the most common perpetrators of violence against men who have never been married or had intimate partner. Allow me to jump into the sexual violence statistics. That 13% of women that had reported experienced sexual violence at some point of their lives, and then 7% during the period of the study reported that they had experienced sexual violence in the last 12 months. Again, the percentage of women who have experienced sexual violence increases with age, where 7% among the age of 15 to 19, to 18%, more than double among those age 40 and 49. So 3% of women who have never been married and never had an intimate partner report sexual violence, as compared with 12% who have never married women who ever had an intimate partner, which stood at around 13%. Again, it's worth noting that Bungoma is still a county which was flagged as highest in terms of sexual violence at 30%, followed by Murang'a, Homa Bay County at 23%, and Embu County at 22%. So who are the perpetrators of sexual violence? According to the report, IPV, intimate partner violence, especially the current husbands or intimate partners, came top at 71%, followed by former husband at 19%. Again, one of the panelists had also hinted about FGM, and it's something also we like to hear from the participants. I know one of us will be handling it, but again, you can type your experiences around FGM, which is widely recognized as a human rights violation and was deeply rooted in our beliefs and perceptions over generations. So we'd like to hear the voices of young the participants are present about FGM and the prevalence of FGM in your county. Allow me to jump over to the last form of violence, which I'll just take a minute just to expand. I think my colleague did justice around that, is that we need to recognize that more of us are getting attuned and adopting the tools of technology. But this adoption has broadened the scope of violence that is being enacted against victims. Again, we're seeing a move from the physical now into the space using the same tactics. But quickly, just to remind us that technology frustrated gender-based violence is still most prevalent on the older platforms of Facebook and WhatsApp. We're not ruling about the Twitter or the IG and other new technologies, but Facebook and WhatsApp stood at 30% of where most violence are taking place. And the most prevalent forms of technology for gender-based violence are big set intimate images that one did not ask for, which stood at around 29.1%. These are global study. Hate speech, and hate speech is something close home, 25%. Harassing private messages, which stood at 22%, and cyberbullying and cyber stalking. Remember, we used for physical stalker, but now faceless people are cyberbullying and stalking you. And how when you put it is that somebody can stalk you and they're not within your geographical area. Ako kule maju, ama in their country or outside your county, but they are at you. Okay. And most of, in fact, 60% of respondents are indicating that technology frustrated gender-based violence were perpetrated by strangers or someone whose real identity they do not know. So young people really need to be aware about that. Before I conclude, again, let me just highlight an interesting trend, which has also been documented, that there's an alarming trend where almost 60% of persons with disability had experience on online violence, moving offline and also vice versa. And this was attributed to factors including physical limitation, ignorance, and ignorance is no longer believed, the prejudice against PWDs, and also the culture that has distorted the frame of knowledge about PWDs and primarily defines people by their gender roles. Thank you so much, Gloria.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Davis. The data has kept me wondering, and I think I will get back to that. I've seen a couple of questions, and I would want to welcome Halima just to take us through the question and answer session before we come back once again for the panel discussion. There's still one more to go. Halima, karibu.
Thank you so much, Gloria. So there are a couple of questions from the unsigned question and answer segment. So Andrew Wimali would like to know, are the links between casual sex or transactional sex and increased rates of femicide? Are there links between that? And are there prevention intervention targeting youth, gender-based violence or intimate partner violence in young couple relationships? I think those questions are for Wendy and Barbara.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, for your question. Are there links between casual sex or transactional sex and increased rates of femicide? Okay. Going back to what I had shared earlier, when we are having conversations about any form of violence against women and girls, or just generally sexual and gender-based violence, we need to remember or acknowledge the fact that we only have 3 root causes to sexual and gender-based violence. We are talking about abuse of power, the fact that somebody would use the power they have over someone or force them to do something that they wouldn't consent to because of the power dynamics between them. And then gender inequality, of course, because of the male-dominated or patriarchal society that we've been living in for a very long time, the gender and social norms that most of us have been socialized to abide by. And then lastly, disregard for human rights. So with that in mind, it becomes easier for us to address such concerns, because when you talk about transactional sex and casual sex will just happen. And then if somebody was to have casual sex with another partner right now, and it ends at that point, then that will just be casual sex evil too. But then the fact that somebody goes ahead and kills the other partner or other individuals that they're involved with, that means that because there is intentionality. You can't just wake up and decide to stab somebody, or you can't say you've had casual sex with somebody and then after you're done, you decide to stab them. That means there is an intention for you to do that. And then back to transactional sex, because I feel like that most of the time is the conversation that comes up, that will of course brings a lot of controversies when you're talking about cases of femicide, because most of the times people associate cases of femicide with say sex workers or individuals who decided to just go and meet up with another individual and engage with them. But remember, I had mentioned that some femicide cases do not happen in such contexts. Some husbands kill their wives. Some relatives or in-laws kill their other partners, because femicide is based on an account of gender. But then you realize for transactional sex, as much as there is that transaction, you give me sex, I give you money, or I give you whatever we've agreed upon, it should end at that. The killing aspect of it is what is on the extreme end, and that's one individual violating the rights of others. But then also going back to when you talk about transaction, it means in most cases, especially for situations, say for instance, for ladies in higher education institutions, because most of the time they fall victim for this. They have relationships with, let's say, older men, and it's because of also the power dynamics and the situation that probably this individual is in. And in some cases, somebody is not able to make a decision consciously and consent willingly. Because when we're having conversations about, say, sexual violence, there's a bit about consent, somebody willingly agreeing to do something, and in this case, it will be engaging in a sex with this other individual. So if this consent is obtained because of coercion, if consent is obtained because from somebody who is unconscious and is not able to make a decision, if consent is obtained because this individual is not of sane mind, then it means there is some power dynamics. So sometimes transactional case would take that look, and then in other cases, the other individual would end up killing this individual. So it's a very controversial conversation. There's a very thin line, but then let's just have it in mind that people violate others, or individuals kill women because they are women, because they want to do that, not because of anything else. Let's not justify or condone any form of violence against women. Thank you, Gloria. And Halima, over to you.
Thank you so much for that. And we will take the rest of the questions after the session. And so over to you, Gloria.
Thank you so much, Halima. It is also important to note that from the last presentation that we've had from Davis, and also this was also mentioned by Barbara as well as Wendy, that the power imbalance and the disproportionality that is experienced between women and men sometimes puts them at a very higher risk of experiencing gender-based violence. But besides that, there are also other elements of, there are also other issues such as cultural norms, beliefs, and that also puts women at a greater risk of gender-based violence. So I would also wish to welcome Collins to share with us some of these norms that puts women at a risk of gender-based violence, and the beliefs, and also all these deeply rooted beliefs and cultural practices that puts women in a very awkward situation as recipients of gender-based violence. Collins?
Thank you very much, Gloria. And mine is just to build up from the contributions of the panelists who have preceded me, and to begin by saying that gender-based violence does not happen in a vacuum, and that there's context to everything. If you look at the cases or the forms of GBV that the other panelists have talked about as either more escalated within our context, mentions have been made to intimate partner violence, defilement, to femicide, and to technologically aided sexual violence. Then to think about how this interacts with culture, you need first to place this violence within the cultural setups that they happen in. If you look at IPV, you look at defilement, the key perpetrators are people who are known to these persons. So ideally, it happens within a space where people have a relation. It could be at the family, it could be at a social club, or it could be at the workplace. So then we need to be alive to situations in the workplace or situations at the family level or at the cultural group level that permits this particular conduct of violence against one gender against the other. Patriarchy has been mentioned, and patriarchy is as old as the history of man. And what patriarchy does is that it distributes power disproportionately, and it redefines the concept of masculinity and femininity to the advantage of one gender over the other. What then this means is, one, it places one gender at the point of vulnerability and at the point of acceptance to be for violation. But on the other end, it of this dichotomy is that it places the other gender at the point of finding self-aggrandizement and permission to violate the other gender. So patriarchy as it is should be dismantled and be and we women who majority are victims of patriarchy should be emancipated from the claws of this tradition. But again, when you talk of patriarchy, we should not look at patriarchy as a men versus women issue, because even women can be patriarchal, having been socialized through the practice of patriarchy. So one mistake we have done over time is to dichotomize patriarchy with the gender lens of men versus women and boys versus girls, not appreciating that the historical moment has made even women to be as patriarchal as some men. So that is one thing, the issue of power. And the issue of power also contributes to gender roles. So patriarchy aligns care care services to women and economically productive services to men. What this means is that it robs a bigger population of humanity the power to fend for itself and the power to be self-reliant, and ideally the concept of self-determination in terms of safety and security. So then this also again puts women and girls at a point of vulnerability, and even children. So it defines which economic activities that you can trade in, and they're not those economic activities that can emancipate you or take you from point A to point B, but rather keep you within the tether of violation and domination. So in that context, GBV is catalyzed by economic conditions which find their root in patriarchy. Then the other is the concept of perfection, which also has its roots in patriarchy, where women who ideally are on the receiving end of violence are given higher standards to live up to. They are expected to be perfectionists, while men have a lot of have a lot of passes on them, or a lot of buys for their side. And then, and this is what has culminated in victim blaming, where you still have to be asked, what were you wearing at that time? Why had you to go to the shop at night? Don't you know that men are this and men are that? So ideally, patriarchy entrenches victim blaming because puts puts the victim or the survivor on the receiving end. But also the other driver to this is the application of language. For instance, in the legal in the legal space, when you begin to call someone a victim, ideally it puts that person to think that they contributed, because it gives you a new terminology, a new definition away from yourself. 1 minute earlier you are violent, then the next minute later you are a victim. So ideally what this has done to a good number of persons is then they try to shy away from a system which wants to give them a label. And this in itself encourages GBV, because then many people will not be seeking justice for themselves, will shy away from the justice process. But there are other in other spaces, like in social media, or when we come to technology, there's also a culture around technology, and one of the culture is that people are free to say what they want and think how they and describe you and abuse you and whatever they can, without without being held accountable. So social media is so loose to accountability, and internet service providers and mobile phone manufacturers have not been held accountable. So it creates a vague notion of freedom of abuse within those spaces, but also to hold the perpetrator accountable becomes very difficult because of technology issues, considering technology coverage in the wider sub-Saharan Africa. So cultural issues also, you look at organizational culture in places, in work industries, particularly in what has been called um, the informal artisanal spaces, where there are no policies, where there are no mechanisms for holding people accountable, where it is not open to discussions, and it's happening a lot amongst domestic workers in spaces like artisanal mining spaces, largely the cottage industry, but also sometimes even in spaces like export processing zones. So this culture, that the culture of permissibility, also entrenches violence against women, and the issue of gender stereotyping, issues of prejudice, issues of acceptance of violence as part of the public sphere are things that we can touch on, but in width and breadth, I think I just want to say that we need to recalibrate. We need to be very deliberate in recalibrating cultural practices, norms, beliefs, and perceptions within all spaces, within all spaces, and in liberating all genders from cultural socializations that promote gender-based violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Collins. That was rich enough. And I would also want to share briefly about one of the forms of violence that was mentioned, that is the female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation has existed long enough in the queer community, and it has come out as one of the vices as far as sexual gender-based violence is concerned. And currently, what we are facing is a backlash from what we have always advocated against. And it is very sad to see our girls, after our intervention through the Power to Youth project that is supported by Amref. As Tunaweza, we were supported by Power to Youth to implement activities in Migori County, in Kuria East and Kuria West. And what we have been able to do was to create the urgency among young people to access services, sexual and reproductive health services, to hold leaders accountable, as well as to leverage on the platforms that they can able to fight for their rights, as well as also be present and available and meaningfully participate in decision-making tables at the county, at the ward level, and nationally. But over time, we have been on the forefront championing for end of FGM. And I just want to take us through of situational analysis as far as FGM issue is concerned currently. So mass female genital mutilation in Kuria status update, just a brief. So every December during school holidays, girls usually undergo female genital mutilation or cutting, which is a cultural and harmful tradition that has been practiced and to preserve purity and to encourage marriageability among girls of age 9 to adolescent or young women. So female genital holiday cutting is traditionally done during the girls' bodies are not even given time to heal. The dangerous zones in Migori County right now are 3 sub-counties, that is Kuria West, Mabera, and Kuria East. And during this Christmas, the danger is even greater than even before, that there has been a mass cutting of girls, some as well as older women who have even got married. So as of 29th of November 2024, 245 girls have been rescued and in already established rescue centers. They are there, the girls who are at risk of FGM. And we fear that about 1,000 girls are feared that were already mutilated. And what is sad is that the police have managed to arrest only 10 parents alleged to have abetted FGM and their children. And these only 5 have been arraigned in court in Kuria West. So we need concerted efforts, and based on the ongoing cutting, and the girls are being mutilated and being paraded all over Kuria, and they walk majestically in town because they have gone through the cut and they believe that there is nothing that we can do. We have employed mitigating strategies, and we have supported security meetings to strategize and rescue and prevent girls from going through the cut. We have supported police for the rescue missions. We have also supported rescue center with food items. We have also supported our team, that is the surveillance team, whom we often refer to as monitors, and they are based on voluntary terms to just assess and report cases of girls who are at risk so that the police can take action. The challenge that we have currently is that there is no funding for this emergency rescue work, but there is need for heightened collaboration, and there is a lot of work that is needed by all actors, the government, and the stakeholders that are working in Migori County, not just in Kuria sub-counties. The government is underfunded with limited resources, and as fuel for operations, airtime, foodstuffs, and sanitary towels, there is need to support also the government's institution to enable them carry out. The government should fund and fuel these operations. The new police officers in the stations who have little knowledge about FGM take time to respond, and as they take time to respond, a number of girls are lost to the hands of the cutters. Cutters who have been arrested successfully are held at the police custodies. And there is also the element of cross-border FGM, where cutters move from the border Tanzania. They come here in Kenya to cut the girls. And it becomes really easy to even trace them because they are not known to the security from this side. So the cutters also from Kenya also move to go and cut girls in Tanzania. So there has been that cat and mouse case to try to them at the border points. So I'm particularly sharing this so that even as we get into plenary session, we can actually discuss and get some way forward on how we can move forward, because there is an urgent need to respond to these concerns of FGM. It is in bad shape. Girls are being cut and paraded along the roads during the daytime, unlike before when they could actually, there were a few in numbers who would go for the cut. But currently what is happening is sad. We can share the link and you can see live coverage of what is happening. And the police are seemingly overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. And we have discussed that FGM is also one of the forms of sexual gender-based violence. So I will leave that for now, but then I just wanted to agitate your thinking and also see if there is a way we can come out with a way forward from this meeting so that we are able to rescue more girls and also bring the perpetrators to book. I want to take a different direction and just invite Davis once again to give us a brief highlight of the existing legal frameworks when it comes to gender-based violence prevention. Of course, I know we have international commitments like the Beijing 13 Plus platform, and we also have our own, the national and county levels legal frameworks when it comes to addressing or responding to gender-based violence. So Davis, I would love to give you, our time is well spent, but if you can take 5 to 7 minutes, I'll really appreciate. Thank you, Davis.
Thank you so much, Gloria. And you've stolen the thunder out of my foot. But again, I like how you've reiterated that the Kenyan law, the Constitution of Kenya 2010, reaffirms and recommits the country's position on those international treaties. For example, the commitment that you're going to end all forms of violence and discrimination against women is part and parcel of the laws of Kenya. I think that's something which I really cherish in our laws. Again, Katiba of 2010, especially Article 27, which also acts as our work is equality and non-discrimination on a number of factors, including sex, which also is also seen they guarantee the right to human dignity. And based on the forms of violence, gender-based violence, including technology facilitated, it robs our people the dignity they deserve, which goes against the tenets of the Constitution, including guaranteeing freedom and security of the person by requiring justice, a fair trial, and also prohibiting torture and any form of violence either take place, whether in hiding, is what my sister Gloria has alluded in Korea, or even in private space and in the public. Okay. Now, at 2006, we had a revolutionary law. Maybe it was not revolutionary as such, but the Sexual Offences Act really consolidated the many sexual offences the country had, clearly defining the various sexual violations, including coming up or proposing or anchoring aspects of prevention, response, and protection of all persons from unlawful sexual acts and for connected purposes. It was a game changer in our legislation in the country. Again, we are aware there are efforts to review the act based on the data or the feedback being received on it, so that it can also to align to the dream of the Kenyan Constitution. Again, some of the push for the review. Again, there's been cry that the law favors one gender, and especially the cry that it's really hard on the young boys and men. But again, the reviewers will have to look into that and maybe engage with various stakeholders. So it's an opportunity for young people to lend their voices in making that law. The protection against domestic violence. That's one of my favorite laws, yet one of the least known acts we have in the country. From the discussion, it's emerging that gender-based violence occurs in the private space, and just building on those the social ties alone, and the relationship nature. But the law expressly, recognize violence in marriage, sexual abuse. It also recognizes aspects of defilement. And the beauty of it is that it gives the citizen an authority. If you suspect any violence taking place in your neighborhood, in your home, then it gives you room to report. And the police also, upon receiving such complaints, they also need to inform. The law provides that they need to inform the survivor the available support structures so that we make people speak up against gender-based violence. Another beauty of that act is that it provides protection order, under which it may direct that a respondent shall not physically or sexually abuse the protected person. Employment and Labor Relations Act 2007, and all these discussion also to amend it to conform. And just putting into place what Kodek was talking about. How do we make our workspaces? You support at the community, at the personal levels, you attain your education, and now you're pursuing that career and contributing to the development of the nation. How do we ensure that we make our workspaces safe for you? Also, currently, it says that at least any organization with more than 21 persons need to have a clearly defined sexual and harassment policy in place. The amendment taking place currently has reduced it to at least more than one person. Okay, so we want to make all our workspaces safe. So haijalishi kama ni kubwa ama ndogo, we will want to protect our people. The HIV and AIDS Prevention Act, Provision of Female Genital Mutilation Act of 2011, which my colleague as just alluded to a few minutes ago. Again, another regulatory law we act is the Victim Protection Act, which provides for protection of victims of crime and abuse of power. The law also provides for protection for vulnerable victims. And again, it goes to the extent of defining injury, what it means, especially in terms of bodily harm, emotional distress, as Barbara was putting it, trauma, or pregnancy, which resulting from sexual assault. Again, it also stipulates that a victim has a right to protection from abuse. This is what we need to make young people and Kenyans aware. We've seen a gap, especially the arrest has been done, the prosecutor has done their job. The Witness Protection Act, how do we make people feel safe to go and testify so that we can make the cases watertighter? So the law provides for the protection of witnesses and creates a witness protection agency, which establishes and maintains a protection. So, we talk, let's talk. Okay? If you're in danger, raise an alarm. There is law which protects you. And it also protects the identity of the witnesses. So there's a witness protection unit. They recently published Children's Act of 2022, which also define what child abuse is, and it includes in the act engaging a child in sex tourism. I think one of the panelists have mentioned something around that area. Any sexually explicit conduct or simulation of such conduct, or use or exposure of a child in electronic or online platforms for the purpose of prostitution, pornography, or any other unlawful sexual practice, or use of the child's image for purposes of pornography or sexual gratification. The beauty of it is also recognizing the use of electronic systems or networks, calls them out for soliciting to meet a child for the purpose of engaging in sexual activities and or other sexual abuse against the children. We also need to appreciate our laws around the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. A lot of laws around ethics, public officers, how we need to conduct ourselves, especially the law which prohibits sexual harassment in the public sector. If you are public sector, you want to attract and retain the best of the best to serve Kenyans. Again, we mentioned the aspect of counter-trafficking in persons act, and the individuals prohibits the trafficking of individuals, especially women and children. And at the beauty of the act, it also defines what exploitation is, and it includes aspect of sexual exploitation. And sexual exploitation, if I can explain, is defined in the act as trafficking the intention of doing anything which, if done, will involve the commission of an offense and a sexual offense. Maybe just to remind the audience and the participants that Kenya is at the center, is uniquely placed geographically as a route for trafficking. So we need to be aware it's not something foreign. Look at this Western Kenya country and our borders, whether from Busia or Namanga, there's or up in the north. So this law is also homely. Another beautiful law which we really need to be aware of is the Mental Health Act, which protects persons with mental illness. There's a lot of gender-based violence directed at persons with disability, and especially persons with mental disability. Okay. Lastly, allow me to mention the aspect of the computer misuse and the cyber crimes you mentioned, and it goes or it criminalizes pornography, especially child pornography under Section 2024. Other laws which I'll mention by passing is the National Coroner's Act, which mandates the coroners to investigate cases where it is suspected maternal death or termination of birth. is of sexual-related death. The Data Protection Act of 2019 is new, and it's very, very strong on clauses relating to sex or sexual orientation. Okay, Election Offences Act, where we want to make space safe for all to participate. Then the Penal Code. We cannot forget about the TSC, Teacher Service Commission Act of 2012. Cap 212, which is strong on sexual harassment, condemning it, and calls for thorough investigation, documentation, and stern action, including now you're seeing the black book of sexual offenders being managed by the TSC, something we need to do in the country. Health Act, and lastly, the media. And the beauty of the Media Act is that it has clauses protecting our children from being identified in cases concerning sexual offenses, whether as victims, witnesses, or defendants. Again, the beauty of it is that media is not allowed to identify victims of sexual assault or publish. And not only the media, now beyond the mainstream media, social media, if you're handling a case, how do we protect the identity of survivors? So let's go ahead and fight on this cause field and protect our children forever. Gloria, if I have more time, the Community Service Order, the Penal Code, and also Age of Majority Act are some of the laws that we can ride on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davis. I want also to welcome Collins to share with us. I know the Social Justice Center Working Group has got initiatives that are also in place to help reverse effects of gender-based violence, or as well as protect and prevent gender-based violence. So Collins, in a nutshell, would you kindly highlight some of the initiatives that are there in Kenya and some of the initiatives that we have at the working group that are for prevention of gender-based violence and response?
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you, the panelists, for the great insights. I think Kenya has made significant strides, both in trial and in practice, to find address and redress to gender-based violence at the different levels, at the preventive and at the response end of it. The government, for instance, has in policy and in practice has come up with the gender-based violence recovery centers, which is now being devolved to all sub-county levels, and there's great progress in terms of devolving them to the sub-counties, so that specialized care and response is given to survivors of gender-based violence. But also within these spaces, these spaces have also seen a break in terms of charges that are needed to facilitate the treatment and care of survivors of gender-based violence. An upgrade of the GBVRC is the polycare, which has not picked strongly though. The launch of the polycare, which is a one-stop center for addressing gender-based violence. You know, with the launch of polycare in Nairobi, in Makueni, it has not moved much since the end of Uhuru regime. But the idea behind polycare was just to have one center where a survivor of gender-based violence does not have to make many trips to different stations of service. But the polycare would offer both the legal and the medical and social support and is a referral for justice. But also, what I have seen recently with the move made by President William Ruto just the other day, urging that gender desk officers to be stationed within hospital facilities, which is one way of escalating polycare so that survivors of gender-based violence can find treatment and begin, and if they so choose to pursue, to make complaints for their matters, can proceed with the cases. But there have also been other amendments in policy, like the free treatment for sexual gender-based violence cases. And just yesterday, Kisumu County opened the net wide that for all gender-based violence cases, so that from public institutions they can get free treatment. And I think many this is a call for other counties also to try to reconsider widening the scope of treatment of treatment for gender-based violence cases, including the taking of P3s, filling of P3s, to move from just sexual violence to the entire spectrum of gender-based violence. But also at the community level, there have been other initiatives, and part of these initiatives is in the establishment of community gender desks, which, for instance, the social justice movement have pioneered establishment of gender desk at the community level, where community members can reach to lodge complaint and can seek assistance in terms of referrals and in terms of psychosocial support and monitoring. So they become they are able to offer the immediate service, care service that gender-based violence survivors need, just like first aid, but they are also able to interact and connect these survivors with other referral institutions. Having said this, also, we need to appreciate that for the place of children, the Children's Protection Unit at the police stations becomes very crucial. For instance, if a matter of violence that is perpetrated against children is reported, then the Children's Protection Unit are able, one, to help in doing rescue, help in making arrests, but also help in facilitating urgent and care, or whether it is medical or judicial care for the child in question. Also, we have seen the rise of programs by civil society or public benefit organizations in terms of awareness creation, in terms of human rights education targeting children, so children are able to speak up and children are able to be self-aware and to know whether they are being violated or not. And I think these are very preventive, and the concerted effort around this by multi-stakeholders has contributed a lot to increased reporting of violations from the community. But again, also there is the transformation of social justice centers to alternative justice system spaces, which I have seen, and this has helped in resolving cases where more so in cases around disputes between intimate partners that necessarily do not need to take the criminal procedure lens that the courts have adopted. And in terms of resolving these matters and addressing the root causes of the disputes and the advantage of restoring relationship between the parties. So I have seen that right now social justice centers have taken the wing of the direction of converting the centers into alternative justice system centers. So these are just some of initiatives that are out there in a bid to contribute to, in one way or another, to addressing, to responding, or even to prevention of gender-based violence. Thank you very much, Gloria.
Yeah, thank you so much, Collins, for that. It was well elaborated. I would just want to maybe also share briefly on the same. So some of the initiatives that perhaps could be in addition to what you have mentioned is the enhancement of safe spaces. We have had safe spaces. Of course, most of them are temporal, but we also encourage that if we could have permanent ones established and operationalized by the government. Then as Migori County, we've had the review of the sexual gender-based violence policy that was put in place just to help in prevention and response to GBV. We've had witness protection. There is also the element of legal aid that we have done a couple of times just to ensure that survivors are not left out in terms of access to justice. Then we've also had case follow-ups in place. So those are some of the initiatives that have also been put in place to enhance GBV response. Our time is much spent, and we are almost towards the end of this discussion. And before I open it up for panel discussion, I feel that there is one key element that it's also important if we could discuss, and that Collins also mentioned, and I would just want Wendy to speak briefly about it, the issue of gender recovery centers as a safe space for survivors of gender-based violence. So in brief, Wendy, would you please take up the microphone and just share briefly of how the recovery centers work, and if at all there are certain elements that you need to share with the public and everyone else to know. Karibu, Wendy.
Thank you, Gloria. So in regards to sorry about that. So in regards to the gender violence recovery centers, I think right now we have recovery centers in like 10 counties in Kenya. They've been helpful in provision of essential services to survivors of sexual violence, but then you realize most of the recovery centers would address issues around medical supports and psychosocial support. So it doesn't go beyond or providing maybe legal services for survivors. So the recovery centers have been there, they've been helpful, at least survivors have been able to get the support services, but then the gap comes in terms of getting temporary safe shelters, because when we do a comparison of GVRCs and the temporary safe shelters, GVRCs are there, though they are little, because when we say there are 10, right now there are 10 in the 47 out of the 47 counties, and we have like 314 sub-counties in Kenya. So it tells you there's that's a very low number. But then when you do a comparison of GVRC and safe shelters, which safe shelters need to provide temporary shelter for survivors, that's where we have a big gap, because most of the shelters that are existing right now in Kenya are private owned, meaning they're either owned by individuals or maybe non-governmental organizations. So that's one of the gaps that maybe can be addressed to ensure that we're able to provide holistic support to survivors of SGBV, and also guidelines for the management of shelters. And I know this is a mandate that is under the Office of the Vice. So of course, yeah. So in brief, that's just it in regards to GVRCs and temporary safe shelters.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. I want to welcome Halima to briefly look into some of the questions that we had at on the Q&A section. Just brief before we get into parting shots. Halima? Okay, seems like there are some technical issues with Halima. Let me just run through some of the questions that I feel that could be responded to. Someone asked, is there a chance that GBV data can be shared at least for the programmers like me? So maybe Davis can share that, can respond to that later. Is the power over allowed, and is it also a form of GBV? Maybe Barbara can help us respond to that. What successful community practice initiative has been implemented to promote zero tolerance to GBV? Collins, could you help us respond to that? Then someone mentioned that there was an oversight. I can see the sign language interpreter. There's none. Sorry, we don't factor in that. Apologies, sincere apologies. I would like to understand the dynamics around cutting of women aged over 30 years. What are the push and pull factors? I will be able to respond to that. And then somebody agreed that the cross-border FGM is a menace, as Tanzania is seemingly not keen on handling the challenges in the territory. Yes, for sure. Someone also shares our agony. FGM issues rampant here in Baringo County. And the sad bit is that it's no longer a girl's thing. Yeah, it's not a girl's thing. It's a human rights affair. It's now happening in regions where it had not initially been happening. Then the last one is all understand the limitation and practice of law. I would like to know programmatic sustainability approaches within the community to promote tolerance to GBV, and this would be food for thought for us. So I want to respond to that one. The first on issue of women as old as age 30 going for FGM. You understand that Collins mentioned that these are cultural norms, and they put both women and men in crossroads. FGM for so long has been thought to be a men's affair, but then in the real sense, it is not. It is a menace that looks beyond what we can see with our eyes, because sometimes the community talk about it as being spiritual. Some people talk about it as being culture. Some of the people talk about it being a mix of culture and spirituality in it. So the fact that women as old as 30 years can still go back or even come from school and go for the initiation is that they want to have a societal acceptance that if you are not a woman, if you're not circumcised, if you're not mutilated, then you're not woman enough. And even the worst of it all is that even the people that have been enlightened, the elite that we think that can talk about it and talk against it and actually embrace that people can move from a retrogressive cultural practice to a more progressive culture, do not see the need. So it is not something that we can delve into and say that we really understand what happens when FGM happens. It beats any logic, it beats any imagination. Why a woman as old as beyond 20 years can still come from their marriage and accept to be cut. Perhaps because of the stigma that they have experienced in the community, perhaps because of the name calling that they've had in the community, perhaps because of just some of them even have it for fun because of the festivities and the celebratory mood that it comes with. So I think I would leave it at that because of time, but there is more than meets the eye when FGM is mentioned. Davis, maybe you can answer your question and also give your parting shot.
Thank you so much, Lord. The KNBS data shared the chat. I think I dropped the attachment, but again, it's available online. Reach, engage data. At the same time, we, at the commission being one of our functions, our mandate is on data warehousing. We are working on sexual gender-based violence information systems so that at a click of a button, you'll be able to get what's happening nationally in the respective countries. My parting shot is that we stand in solidarity with the survivors of gender-based violence, and let us, all of us, do the chat too. is that we need to recognize that violence against women and girls is pervasive human rights violation, and it's currently at a crisis level, and it's rooted in our harmful gender. So we need to question our families, uh, the religious practices, the cultural roles that are doing in as the drivers of violence. And then last but not least, just want to echo what the panelists, fellow panelists say, that it's important that we acknowledge that violence affects also men and boys. So let us all break the culture of silence, which is still hindering women and girls from reporting gender-based violence, including men. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Davis. Barbara, your response and cutting short.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Allow me to say that when it comes to GBV matters, the issue of power dynamic cannot go untouched. And I would want to say that from the question of power over allowed, whether power over is allowed or it is a form of GBV, I would respond that it is somewhat a driver to GBV. And in any ecosystem, you have to agree with me that you can either experience oppression or privileges depending with your position in the hierarchy of power, and it is this oppressive power that sometimes might lead to an individual experiencing gender-based violence. Allow me to delve a little bit into this using an intersectional lens. So, as we understand human, we don't live a single issue life, and each individual has an identity, and this identity is made up of many complex and intertwined identity factors, which sometimes in our programming and intervention, on GPV, we tend to reduce to gender alone. And that's why we keep seeing, alarming cases of gender-based violence, as alluded earlier by Davis. And the concept of intersectionality can really help us understand these multiple forms of discrimination, how they interact, create inequality, even in gender programming. But now, speaking of intersectionality, while we apply it, especially for the Makeway program that I serve, we use an intersectional lens to see how these different types of power are at play within an individual and how this may predispose them to gender-based violence. One of the things that we need to understand about power is probably to understand survival experience. What are the lived experience? And from their own identities and how these identities may interact. And also, this lens will also help us to improve interventions and also recognize that there are multiple identities, and especially to avoid this kind of binary thinking where we only see an individual as man, woman, and also on and so forth. And when you talk about survivors and power, survivors of GBV, they often, face a combination of several systems of oppression, just like I alluded earlier. And for instance, just to put that to context, a survivor of violence who probably is a foreigner and has a disability or belongs to the LGBTQI plus persons, will, depending on their own experience, lived experience, they may face, for instance, homophobia, and this increasingly reinforce GBV and also how they experience intervention of GBV. And as I conclude, the understanding of intersectional concept also, how help us to know how survivors of GBV experience from multiple sources, experience gender-based violence from multiple sources, and it will also help us to take into account how particular survivors, overlapping identities that I've just mentioned, expose them to different levels of discrimination, even in the GVR, in our recovery centers, just as mentioned before. And when tackling these issues, we need to do analysis, and probably this should be my parting shot. And while doing analysis, we need to consider a number of levels of our analysis, and this include institutional level. So at institutional level, we've seen a manifestation of experiences where an institution, decide not to give an intervention to a person because of the restrictive law. For instance, a person who is a gender diverse person. So they might quote, restrictive law and so on and so forth. And this then deny them the opportunity to access justice and, even access the recovery centers. And we also have at interpersonal level, because of age. Remember, I talked about different identities, and age is also identity. Somebody may decide, no, I'm not going to report my case because, I'm young, I'm a teenager, and it stops at that. And it has prevented us from having the real statistics on the ground. And finally, we have these internalized levels. And internalized level in my world, let me talk about a little bit about feminism. When we talk about internalized misogyny, we have believed stereotype that the society has reinforced onto us over and over again, that women are the weaker sex. So when you internalize such perspectives, you are unable to really report cases or even be able to access these centers or access prevention programs. And for instance, for persons with disability, a person who is a deaf may think that, it is a privilege for me to have a deaf person in a recovery center, not necessarily a deaf, but a sign language interpreter in a recovery center. While this is not the case, it is their right to have a sign language interpreter in the recovery center. So with that, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me as a panelist. I really enjoyed this conversation. Back to you, Gloria.
Wendy, your parting shot.
Thank you, Gloria. So for me, I just speak about the aspect of ineffective coordination of the actors in the criminal justice entry points, that's health, justice, and security, and other stakeholders involved. So if we are to make steps to address and reduce the prevalence of SGBV, then there is need for the government, of course, because that mandates fall within them, for them to ensure that there is effective coordination of these actors within the space. And looking at also if we can work together, if we can foster partnerships to ensure that we advance for the protection of survivors, and also push for survivor-centered interventions and trauma-informed service provision along the referral pathway. And another bit is also pushing for the establishment of a unit, a specialized unit in under the Ministry of Interior, so that this addresses all sex crimes. Because if you can have a dogs unit, a water unit, then we also need to have a sex crimes unit, considering the high prevalence of sexual crimes or sexual offenses in Kenya. And that would need solidarity from actors in the civil society space, and also actors from the government to push for these interventions, and also for the participation of CSOs in like issues around bits of like treaty reporting, because it would be good for us to push for these conversations at higher levels beyond the national level. And then to finish up, I'd also like to speak about the toll-free line that we have at Wangukanja Foundation that is available for survivors to report cases of sexual violence from all 47 counties in Kenya. The toll-free line is 1519-1519, and it's available for Safaricom and Airtel users free of charge. Thank you for having me.
Wendy, can you repeat the toll-free number?
The toll-free line is 1519-1519. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that and for sharing the toll-free number. I want to give my parting shot, then give it to Halima to wrap up. We have realized that we cannot substitute upholding human rights for anything. So within these 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, today is day 12. I just want us to remind us of our shared responsibility to remove or to eliminate the pervasive human rights violation, and that is GBV, because we have realized that it is an epidemic and it shames humanity. It is not just a woman's affair. It's not just a man's affair. It brings down the dignity of humanity. So let's stop normalizing harmful social norms that often justify abuse. So let's invest and end gender-based violence. Thank you so much for attending. That's my parting shot. And I appreciate you so much for staying till the end. I want to give it over to Halima so that she makes her final remarks. And wish you all the best and Merry Christmas to you all.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. This was a very engaging session. Sorry about earlier, I was having a bit of technical issues. But thank you to the panelists who joined us. You gave a lot of insightful information, especially I really love, Davis, what you were talking about data and how we can incorporate data into finding more about gender-based violence in Kenya. To our listeners and to everyone else who joined us today, thank you so much. Again, gender-based violence is something that is pervasive in our culture, and we need to have more discussions like this so that we can create dialogue, and also so that at the end of the day, we can end GBV, especially FGMC. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria and team. Bye.